Chapter 236. 2. Sisters who try to kill each other, you're right. Lu Junyao's face was a little grave as he nodded, his eyes gazing upon the young lady's face in his arms. That god had 11 daughters back then, and every one of those 11 goddesses possessed gift and beauty that moved the entire cloud heaven. Among them all, the 11th and 9th princess were most outstanding, and they were the daughters that the god doted upon the most. It was then rumored that the leadership of the divine temple would definitely be inherited by one of those two princesses. But one day, strange misfortune struck the divine temple. The 11 goddesses came down with a strange illness one after another. Even the sect leader of the divine healers did not know what to do, and they ended up departing from the world one by one, until only the two candidates, the 9th princess and the 11th princess, who were the most probable candidates of inheriting the divine temple, were left. From then on, the god naturally came to pamper and dote on the two of them even more, not letting anyone have any chance of hurting those two last daughters of his. Sometime later, the god came to discover the real cause of his daughter's death. It wasn't merely due to accidental misfortune, but it was because someone had secretly learnt the forbidden arts. The divine temple was a place that was the closest to the gods, and anyone who practiced evil forbidden arts that harmed people would see punishment meted onto that person's closest kin. The deeper the person cultivated the forbidden arts, the greater the number of people who will be killed. Investigations finally revealed that the person who practiced the forbidden arts was the 11th princess, the daughter that God doted on the most. In a fit of rage, the god almost beat the 11th princess to her death and severed their father and daughter ties before kicking her out of the divine temple. Naturally, the divine temple could only be passed down to the 9th princess, the one and only child who was left. The person who practiced the forbidden arts was actually not the 11th princess but the 9th princess, right? Qingyu was already able to guess the answer after hearing everything that Lu Junyao said. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. That's right. Lu Junyao lowered his head to gaze at the young lady's face before he continued. And the current temple lord of the divine temple now is the very same 9th princess from back then? And if I am not wrong? Qingyu narrowed her eyes, wiping away all emotion in her eyes before she said, "The 11th princess is my mother." Lu Junyao sighed softly. Yes, Aunt Lan was the 11th princess who was thrown out of the divine temple. Qingyu's fingers clenched tightly into fists, her words coming out haltingly with a pause between each word. Aren't the two of them sisters? Why would siblings be seeking to kill each other? Among the 11 goddesses, the 9th princess and the 11th princess were actually the closest to each other, as the two of them grew up together with each other, and they shared everything they had with the other, never having quarreled. But in the end, their relationship slowly changed, as suspicion and animosity festered and grew. Chapter 236. 3. Sisters who try to kill each other because they came to fall in love with the same man. You would probably have guessed that that man is your father, the chieftain of the barbarian tribe, Mo Jingyu. Lu Junyao curled his lips in disdain as he said scornfully, "That man has always been suave and flirtatious, capturing the hearts of countless ladies, but never remaining fixed to any single one person, until he met Aunt Lan, where he fell completely head over heels. From then on, he fell inextricably in love with her, but Aunt Lan was unmoved by him, not falling for his ways at all. It is always said that nothing can be more precious than having a drifter turn back on his ways, and this must be an example of that. His heart had really been taken with her, and how could Aunt Lan possibly resist his relentless pursuit? In the end, she came to accept him. But at the same time, the 9th princess had also fallen deeply in love with him as well. When she came to find out that the man she loved the most was with the younger sister she was closest with, she was heartbroken. One was the man she loved very much, and the other was her younger sister, so she could not hate or begrudge them. In the end, at the expense of her own dignity and self-respect, she went to beg Mo Jingyu to accept both of the sisters, as she did not minding sharing the same husband with her younger sister. "And my father rejected her?" Qingyu asked hesitatingly. Lu Junyao laughed aloud. Not only did he reject her, he said some rather nasty words, completely severing any kind of affection she could have hoped for. Read latest chapters at Audiobook. Ever since then, the ninth princess changed. She felt that the entire world had turned their back on her, her heart becoming dark and twisted. She began to cultivate maniacally to make herself become powerful, and used forbidden techniques to make her countenance become younger and more beautiful. She felt that she had to be more outstanding than her younger sister, and be more beautiful than her, to make Imo Jingyu look at her in another light. She did become powerful and more beautiful looking, but she lost the kind of pure and untainted innocence she once had, and people around her no longer looked upon her with pure and simple envy, but with fear and terror. The death of their godly father was brought on not only by the punishment dealt out because she practiced forbidden arts, it was mainly because the god came to discover that secret she was hiding, and had ordered for her to be dealt with. By that time, her cultivation had become so powerful that even the god was unable to stand against her, and practicing the forbidden arts had devoured her sensibilities and humanity. In order to not let her godly father expose her secret, she used her forbidden techniques to absorb all her godly father's lifetime of cultivation. In Cloud Heaven, a person's level of cultivation is linked to the length of one's lifespan, so without his cultivation powers, he was as good as dead. That was the real reason for the god's accidental death in the year that he was to turn 1,000 years old. Qingyu remained silent as she listened to the entire story. She was quiet for another moment after that, and then suddenly raised her eyes up to ask, "Between you and her, who would come out superior?" Chapter 236. 4. Sisters who try to kill each other. We have not had the chance to compare before, so I do not know, Lu Junyao said with an eyebrow raised, his eyes shining with a strange glint. But this woman has sent proposal letters to the Dark Lands several times before, and I rejected all of them. Proposal letters? In front of many people, this woman once proclaimed. The man's voice halted in hesitation, suddenly sounding a little coy. Qingyu hummed questioningly, waiting for the man to continue. Lu Junyao coughed softly a couple of times. She said that I was the type of men she likes. Qingyu almost choked on her own saliva when she heard that. Her shoulders then shook as she tried her hardest to control her mirth and said, "And what was your reply to that?" The gloating expression on her face could not be any more obvious. Lu Junyao glanced scathingly out of the corner of his eyes at the young lady. "What did you expect me to say? Of course I rejected her. That woman is at least 500 years old or more, and she could very well be my mother. Moreover, a woman with such a vicious heart, I will have to say I might not be fortunate enough to live through such a kind of blessing." "Oh." Qingyu nodded her head with a serious face. She then blinked her eyes innocently at him and asked, "But I heard that this temple lord is known to be the greatest beauty in Cloud Heaven. Aren't you moved in the slightest at all?" "KSK. What greatest beauty? She's a far cry compared to Aunt Lon. Who knows how hideously ugly she might turn out to be when she sheds off that beautiful mask on her face that is maintained by evil and dastardly techniques." Lu Junyao scoffed in disgusted contempt. Qingyu merely smiled but did not say anything. Time trickled slowly past, and the dark night was slowly about to welcome the arrival of dawn. Qingyu felt a slight bit sleepy, and the man could not bear to leave so quickly, so he just sat there upon the bed of clouds for a little rest, with the young lady in his arms. But that heartwarming scene did not last for long. Read latest chapters at Audiobook. Yu Qing, Temple Lord. Who are you? Qingyu had just fallen asleep for a little while, and her mind was still groggy with sleep when she suddenly heard that angry shout. She was shocked wide awake, and she immediately saw Yu Fan's angry eyes staring ferociously, his clean and good-looking countenance looking malevolent and terrifying. A black sword materialized in his hand in an instant, and he swung it maliciously towards the purple-robed man beside her. Lu Junyao had his eyes closed all this while, and he had only slightly lifted his eyelids indifferently when he heard the commotion, thinking nothing of the strike that was quickly flying towards him. Carrying the young lady in his arms, he suddenly disappeared from sight in that instant. By the time that Yu Fan could react, he suddenly felt the back of his head crawl, sensing impending danger. Before he could do anything, he suddenly saw everything before him go black, losing consciousness. Chapter 237. 1. You suddenly fainted. The tall and well-built purple-robed figure with a devilishly handsome countenance was carrying the young lady who was still groggy from being awoken from sleep. He looked on with an indifferent gaze at the man lying on the ground in an unmoving heap, the murder in his eyes undisguised. His long, slender fingers raised up slightly, but were suddenly held down by a smooth and fair-skinned hand. One of Lu Junyao's eyebrows raised up, casting an inquiring look her way. Qingyu then opened her mouth to say, "This person can still be of some use to me alive, and his personality isn't as inflexible as all the other people here. I might be able to gather some useful information out of him as well." "Is that really the case?" Lu Junyao's eyes narrowed. "Isn't it because this fella is rather good-looking, and you can't bear to have him killed by me?" When Qingyu heard that, she almost could not hold herself back and would have burst out laughing. Seeing the huffed-up expression on the man's face, Qingyu reached her hand out with a smile to pinch that handsome face and said teasingly, "Are you jealous?"
No.
Lu Junyao said defensively. "Give me a smile, then," Qingyu said as she blinked her eyes, which just earned her a scathingly cold glare as expected. Qingyu lowered her head to laugh quietly as she reached a hand up to poke the man's face with a finger. "Do you think that you're not as good-looking as that fella lying there on the ground?" "SK, me losing out to him?" Lu Junyao scoffed disdainfully, his tone of voice filled with incomparable confidence. As he spoke, his foot even seemed to unconsciously kick Yu Fun once in his back. From that unconscious man who was in a coma, a faint groan came to escape through his lips. Qingyu could not help feeling a twitch tug at a corner of her mouth. How hard could he have kicked the guy to cause a person who had lost consciousness to actually feel pain while in a comatose state? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, how petty can he be? All right already. You'd better go as dawn is almost breaking. If anyone were to come here, it will be troublesome for you. Qingyu coaxed in a gentle voice, before she planted a light, reassuring peck on the corner of the man's stiffened lips. It must be said that that trick works rather well on Lu Junyao. He tightened the grip of his arms around her to hug the young lady in his arms and said, "I'll come over again tonight. You must remember to be careful in everything you do, as there isn't a single kindly soul in the entire divine temple. Especially with that woman, you must remember that you must not offend her rashly." I know." Qingyu nodded her head meekly. "As for this man..." Lu Junyao's violet eyes narrowed as he glanced over at the person on the ground, and he said in a low, deep voice, "Keep your distance from him and do not interact with him too much. Otherwise, I will not show him any mercy." Chapter 237. 2. You suddenly fainted. Are you even worried that I will fall for him? Qingyu said in exasperated resignation. Isn't this guy too quick to see everyone as competition? Does he lack confidence so much even with the countenance he possesses? Against anything she could have expected, the man went on to say, "You are so fond of going about on your philandering ways everywhere you go, sparing neither men nor women alike. Moreover, this one is a man here, so my heart cannot be at ease." Qingyu did not know what to say. Hearing those words said, made her feel somewhat awkward. Was she really such a philanderer? After reminding Qingyu to be more careful, the man on the ground was seen to be starting to stir. Lu Junyao did not remain there any longer and disappeared from sight in an instant, leaving soundlessly like how he had come. Qingyu clicked her tongue, wondering what kind of levels that fella's cultivation could have reached. But to be able to become the reigning lord over one of Cloud Heaven's major powers, and also to be able to freely enter and leave from the divine temple, which was supposedly highly difficult to go into, his cultivation must have reached a level that was almost impossible to attain. She was contemplating deeply when the man on the ground came to stir awake, his eyes befuddled for a moment. Qingyu was worried for a moment that the man would suddenly jump up in rage towards her, but just saw the man climb slowly to his feet, and then crease up his brows as he asked her, "Why am I here?" Qingyu's eyes blinked in confusion. "Don't you remember? What is happening here?" He is actually asking why he is here? Remember what? Yu Fern's eyes filled up with suspicion. Nothing much, but you came to look for me, and I don't know what happened when you fainted all of a sudden. You would not wake up no matter how hard I called out to you, and I was just about to go ask for help. Qingyu managed to react quickly, coming up with an adequate response on the spot. But Yu Fan was not that easily fooled as his face filled up with suspicion. I fainted all of a sudden? That's right, that's right. Qingyu's face was earnest as she nodded. Why did I suddenly faint? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, how would I know? Did you surprise me with an attack? Yu Fan's gaze grew sharp. Huh, we're in your territory here. How would I dare to try such a trick? I am not seeking my own death here, you know? Qingyu said with a roll of her eyes. Yu Fan saw nothing suspicious in her reaction, and she was not showing any signs of guilt. Moreover, with his own level of cultivation, it would not be easy for her to spring a surprise attack on him, so he was no longer suspicious. With that outburst from her, Yu Fan remembered his purpose in coming here. He immediately said in a cold voice, "The Temple Lord wanted me to bring you to go see her." Chapter 237. 3. You suddenly fainted, what for? Qingyu raised an eyebrow as she looked up at the sky that was still rather dark. It is barely just past the Mao hour. Isn't it a bit too early? I don't need to hear your nonsense. Just go when you're told. Yu Fan scoffed coldly and went ahead to turn himself around as he walked off without waiting for her. If she had known, she would not have stopped Lu Junyao from beating this guy here into an idiot. But Yu Fan, who was walking in front, could not help feeling that there was something wrong with his body. It was only a little while later that he came to think, why was his back hurting so badly? He did not remember being injured on his back at all, but why does it feel like someone had punched him very hard? Yu Fan brought Qingyu to the main hall they had gone to before, and he immediately departed. It was different from yesterday when she had come. The vast hall did not have a whole bunch of oppressive men in black in there, but just 2 attendants standing outside by the door. She was standing there in the middle of the hall, and had not even said anything when the woman behind the curtain veil called out in a soft, gentle voice, "Have a seat." Qingyu was dazed for a moment before she went to sit down on a chair at the side. And there wasn't a single sound in the hall for a while. Qingyu sat there in awkward silence for a while till she could no longer remain quiet and wanted to open her mouth to say something when the curtain veil suddenly moved. A pale white hand then stretched out, beautiful and exquisite like fine jade. Qingyu was surprised for a moment. Is she going to? It was said that the Bright Moon Temple's Temple Lord was highly mysterious and never revealed her face even when she met with guests, always veiled behind sheer silk curtains, where only her svelte and slender figure could be seen. Although her countenance had not been seen by people, but since she was hailed as Cloud Heaven's greatest beauty, that she must extremely beautiful looks. So why had she never shown her face to people was an unsolved mystery. Seeing the woman's actions at that moment, Qingyu could not help but think in her heart, is she coming out from behind those curtains? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, as she had thought, the woman's hand gently parted the curtains to reveal a corner of her scarlet clothes. Qingyu's heart thumped involuntarily inside. What is this woman thinking of doing? Why is she suddenly coming out from there? Would she then want to kill anyone who comes to see her countenance? Qingyu lowered her eyes as she tried to think up a countermeasure. She could hear the sound of light footsteps coming down 1 step at a time from the raised pedestal. In a blink, the woman was already standing just a few steps away from her. Qingyu looked up reflexively. When she saw the person in front of her, she could not help but be stunned. Chapter 237. 4. You suddenly fainted. The woman in front of her looked to be very young, seeming to be in her early 20s. Her pair of seductive and enchanting narrow eyes seemed to be permanently filled with a hazy and indiscernible smile, the type to mesmerize a person with just one look, an alluring beauty that could make a person lose their soul with a second glance. Even for Qingyu, who had been so used to seeing good-looking people, her eyes could not help but light up upon seeing the person standing before her. But after the initial shock wore off, she thought that something was a little puzzling. The Temple Lord looked so young, beautiful, so why was she always hiding behind a veil, refusing to let people see her? Compared to the faint and hazy figure she saw far behind the curtains yesterday, Qing Luo Fei now stood just a close distance away, and Qing Yu was able to see her clearly. The same. Looks exactly alike. The woman walked over to her and came to sit down beside Qing Yu slowly. Her beautiful hands lifted the superior quality purple sand teapot from the table and poured out a cup of deliciously fragrant tea. Her voice was gentle as she said, "This is tea that you can only find in the divine temple. Have a taste." Qing Yu was flustered as she saw the woman pushing the cup of tea with steam billowing over it towards her, and she was unable to react for a moment. She is offering her tea? Should she drink it or not? Seeing Qing Yu caught in a helpless daze, Qing Luo Fei could not help laughing as she purred. "What? You're afraid there's poison?" Qing Yu snapped back to her senses when she heard the woman's voice, and she curved her lips up in a smile to say, "Why would I? The temple lord would naturally not do something like that." Upon saying that, Qing Yu was already picking up the cup of tea. Truth to be told, she really wasn't afraid that the woman would spike the tea. Not to mention that she was an elixir cultivator herself. Most drugs and poisons would have absolutely no effect on her. And just the fact that she looked so much like her mother would mean that the woman would not be so hasty in doing anything to harm her. Seeing the young lady tasting the tea earnestly, Qing Luo Fei then showed a sincere smile on her face and asked, "How is it?" "It's great tea. It does not have the bitter taste like most teas, and it carries a uniquely refreshing sweetness as well, which relaxes one's mind," Qing Yu said, giving the tea a serious evaluation. "Looks like the young miss here is someone who likes tea as well," Qing Luo Fei said in satisfaction as she nodded her head. "I merely know a little bit about things here and there, all superficial knowledge. It cannot compare to the temple lord at all," Qing Yu said modestly. Qing Luo Fei's eyes flashed with a glint, like a certain emotion had risen up inside her out of the blue and had quickly passed. She then opened her mouth to say, "I heard from you, Fawn, that he brought you back from the lower realms. The crimson gold fiery phoenix is the divine temple's symbolic divine beast that disappeared all of a sudden many years ago. The Grand Priest suddenly detected the divine beast's aura several days ago, and we sent out people down to bring the divine beast back. I wonder if the young miss has seen the divine beast? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Bring it back? Huh. It didn't look that simple at that time. When she first reached the cave, she had seen two of the Divine Temple's disciples attacking the crimson gold fiery phoenix. It was clear that they had been trying to kill the divine beast and to seize the item that it was guarding. So why is she suddenly changing her tune now? Did this woman think that she is just some ignorant and naive little girl from the lower realms and was trying to pull a fast one over her head? Chapter 238. 1. Daggers hidden behind a smile. Qing Yu scoffed disdainfully in her heart, but her face did not show anything but just a slightly puzzled look. What kind of a creature is it? The smile on the ends of Qing Luo Fei's lips stiffened for a moment. You have not seen it before? This lass can really pretend to be a pig and eat a tiger. She was naturally not about to believe that the always loyal Yu Fawn would feed her lies. The crimson gold fiery phoenix's final remnant consciousness had dissipated. For the past several hundred years, it had hidden itself in the lower realms. What could it have been guarding for such a long time? That person is clearly no longer around anymore. The expression on the young lady's face was still steady and calm, not showing the faintest sign of uneasiness. Qing Luo Fei's eyes darkened as she then started to ask, "Does the young miss know what is this place you're in?" "Bright Moon Divine Temple," Qing Yu replied with an arched eyebrow. "Since you know what this place is, do you know that when you tell a lie in a place that is so close to the gods, you will be punished by them?" Qing Luo Fei's enchanting eyes narrowed as she glanced at Qing Yu with an indiscernible smile. Qing Yu almost wanted to burst out laughing. This woman is rather interesting, isn't she? Has she become so fond of trying to scare her? She has had her fair share of scares growing up. What the Temple Lord is saying is really frightening. For a nobody like me to come to a place I've heard only in legends for the first time, I am already jittery with fear, afraid that any word or action from me might be inappropriate or wrong. How could I possibly dare to tell a lie? The young lady took a deep breath, her tone of voice filled with puzzlement. "Do you really not know?" The smile on the ends of Qing Luo Fei's lips had come to be tinged with a slight iciness, and her attractive and immersive eyes were filled with a chilling cold. It was probably because the young lady before her really looked too much like that person, and also because she was not responding to either patient coaxing or insinuated threats. Qing Luo Fei suddenly just could not contain the murderous rage that rose inside her in that instant. Her hand raised up and swung right towards the young lady's forehead. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Yu's expression did not change as she stared straight into the rush of wind blowing towards her. With the palm coming in close, not the slightest ripple showed on her face, but her body secretly tensed up, and her hands under her sleeves held golden needles in their grip, ready to deal with this sudden, unexpected turn of events. Just as a blood-filled scene was almost going to happen before her eyes, the woman's palm suddenly halted just an inch before the young lady's face. Just short of that tiny minute distance away, where the young lady's blood would have splattered all over. It was not known why she had suddenly stopped. The two pairs of eyes looked into each other quietly for a long while, when Qing Luo Fei suddenly laughed softly and moved her hand away from the young lady's head. She then said slowly, "You're quite a bold one, but was born in the lower realms. What a waste." "Is that so?" Qing Yu returned the woman's smile. "It must be affinity then, as I have encountered one of the Temple Lord's subordinates before." Chapter 238. 2. Daggers hidden behind a smile. Oh? Qing Luo Fei raised an eyebrow with interest. "So how did that come about?" "I am an elixir cultivator and I happened to save a very troublesome man by accident. That man was afflicted with voodoo poison and a rather special kind of curse. Although it took me quite a lot of effort, I was fortunately able to cure him." Qing Yu told her story slowly, an unreadable smile on her face as she looked at the woman before her. As expected, the expression on Qing Luo Fei's face changed when she heard that, slight shock and disbelief coming to show on it. Qing Yu's lips curved up almost unnoticeably as she continued to say, "Then came the time where I was attacked by a mysterious person. It was a woman, but she looked heinously ugly, and her body exuded an evil aura. She said she wanted to kill me as I was the one who caused her to turn into that horrifying state that looked neither human nor ghost. She even claimed to be a grand priestess in Cloud Heaven, and I did not know at that time, but I understand where she is from now." That woman's manner of dress was exactly like what everyone here in the Divine Temple wears. But isn't the Divine Temple a sacred place blessed by the gods? How could such an evil being appear in a place like this? This is what I really find very puzzling. Upon saying that, the young lady knitted up her brows, her face looking highly confused. At that moment, Qing Luo Fei's heart surged up in tumult. If what the young lady said is true, then the man she saved would definitely be the overlord of the Darklands, Lu Junyao. She had initially wondered how the lower realms was able to produce a person of such great skill, who was able to unravel the curse they had spent so many years to plant into the body of that man. Even the emotion-devouring curse had been dispelled, which was something she had not thought to be possible. But despite what she thought, someone had really done that. For someone to possess such unparalleled skill in healing, they would usually be some reclusive sage or monstrously old freaks who had lived for a very long time. But right before her eyes at that moment was instead a flawlessly beautiful young lady who looked to be only in her teens, and was telling her with a big smile on her face that she was the one who did it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It all sounded just too incredulous. What is the Temple Lord thinking about? Are you trying to recall if such a person really existed in the Divine Temple? The young lady spoke up with a smile, pulling the woman back from her thoughts. Qing Luo Fei was pulled back to the present. Long used to never ever revealing her emotions for so many years, she was able to regain her composure very quickly. She then gave a soft laugh and said, "There was indeed such a person here before. But she secretly practiced evil arts and fell into the ways of devilry. I have thrown her out from here, seen as a traitor of the Divine Temple. What she got herself into was not made known to me, and I had not thought that she would actually go down to the lower realms to commit such atrocities." "So I see." Qing Yu nodded her head with a look of realization on her face. "That's what I was thinking as well. The Temple Lord does not look like a person who would shield such a sly and treacherous snake, but is a righteous person who is upright and above board. Chapter 238. 3. Daggers hidden behind a smile. The smile on the edge of Qing Luo Fei's lips stiffened for a second before quickly recovering back to normal. That is only natural. Oh right. We've been speaking for so long, and I still don't know what is it that made the Temple Lord ask for me? Qingyu pretended that she had not noticed the ugly expression that passed over the woman's face and went on to ask innocently. Qing Luo Fei was also thinking of bringing that up, but after getting so riled up by Qing Yu's words earlier, which caused her emotions to fluctuate greatly, she didn't have the chance to bring it up yet. She silently pushed down the displeasure in her heart and went on to say, "Oh, I was thinking that since you and I share such a great affinity and the Divine Temple happens to be short of a female attendant, I wanted to tell you that you can choose to stay here if you are willing to. The spirit energy in here is a lot stronger than the lower realms, and it will help you greatly in your cultivation journey. In this world where might made right, no one could possibly not want to get stronger, to allow themselves to hold their own upon this continent." Just as Qing Luo Fei had expected, after she said those words, the young lady immediately opened her mouth to say with a look of undisguised delight on her face, "Thank you, Temple Lord. I will be most willing, of course." The look she put out was exactly like one greedy for self-vainglory, coveting to reach the peaks of power. She could not help but feel scornful contempt rise up inside. She had thought that the young lady would be the same as that person, but the young lady turned out to be nothing special and was just like any other mortal. What a waste of that face that looked so much like that person. After a further round of sham polite banter, Qingyu finally received her orders from Qing Luo Fei, saying that she could be dismissed. Upon coming out from that place, the expression on Qing Yu's face immediately changed. Her acting skills was really getting better and better. She was almost deceived by what she said herself, but she had succeeded in getting herself to remain in here at least. The long phoenix-like eyes turned solemn. No matter what, she must find out the truth of what happened back then, as the person who should suffer such scorn and contempt from the world should not be her mother. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU back in the Darklands, when Bai Jiyan brought back a pretty good-looking youth who looked like he had yet to grow wise to the ways of the world. Everyone was befuddled for a good while. From which realm had this lost sheep been picked up from this time? Someone went up to make fun of the guy, and he was chased off by a rather annoyed Bai Jiyan. The youth looked to be about only 14 or 15 with a pair of clear, limpid eyes like those of a phoenix, handsome facial features, and a pure and untainted air around him that made people hesitant to defile. That youth was none other than Qing Bei. He was still unable to come around in his own head how he had suddenly come to a strange and foreign place out of the blue. Chapter 238. 4. Daggers hidden behind a smile, but he recognized who Bai Jiyan was, and he was not worried that the man would do anything to harm him. Though the world that was completely foreign to him and being surrounded by so many curious and appraising eyes all around made Qing Bei unable to help but open his mouth to ask, "Where is this place?" "Cloud Heaven." Bai Jiyan glanced at him and replied. Hearing that, Qing Bei was startled a moment, and it took him a while to recover. "Is Qingyu here as well?" He recalled that Qingyu had told him several days back that she was making a trip into the Faint Mist Sect's forbidden grounds to investigate a few clues she had gathered about their mother, and she had not yet returned from there ever since. He was starting to become worried that she might have met with some mishap and was thinking to go look for her in there. Bai Jiyan, who had disappeared for quite a long while, then appeared suddenly and brought him to this place. All this time, the man was no longer a stranger to him because of Qingyu, but he had not interacted with the man all that much either. Hence, he guessed that the reason the man had brought him here must have something to do with Qingyu's disappearance. Although he had always said that he would make his own way here to this place one day, he had not thought that he would come here so suddenly like this, into this place of legend, where super-powerful pugilists exist. It was all rather unbelievable. Bai Jiyan was a little surprised by his reaction, but he still nodded smilingly to the youth as he said, "The young lass has indeed been brought here into Cloud Heaven, but she isn't here in the Darklands with us." "Where is she then?" When Qing Bei heard that Qingyu was brought here by someone else, she would naturally be in a bad situation, so he immediately became worried for her safety. Bai Jiyin shook his head with a laugh. Rest assured, with Lu Junyao here, nothing will happen to her. We are here in our own territory, and anyone who seeks to make a single move against our people will first have to seek the Dark Land's permission first. Qing Bei nimbly captured the most important point within Bai Jiyan's words. When did Qing Yu become one of your people? Qing Bei's brows had creased up, instinctively disliking those words. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Maybe it was because he had been so used to having Qing Yu assume a highly important position in his heart, and it felt as if someone was going to take her away from his world at that moment. Bai Jiyin was a man who had already lived more than 200 years, so how could he possibly not have detected the change in the kid's demeanor? Bai Jiyin could not help but laugh and look at Qing Bei and say, "The little lass is now inseparable like glue with Lu Junyao. Are you afraid that she will neglect you? Isn't it better now that you have one more person that cares for you as well?" "I do not need it." Qing Bei's voice was gloomy. His eyes turned away to the side as his heart felt rather uncomfortable. The man beside him then went on to say, "I've brought him back here, so I'll make a move now." "Thanks." This was another person's voice, low and magnetic, filled with an allure that was impossible to disregard. Chapter 239. 1. Towards me. She has always been very passionate. Qing Bei subconsciously raised his head and saw a tall, well-built figure in a purple robe walking slowly as he approached, with that familiarly devilishly striking countenance, his facial features deep and handsome, and an imperceptible smile hanging from his lips. A beautiful and seductive woman followed right behind him, the expression on her face looking slightly amused. "My lord, this is the little lass younger brother?" Meiji opened her mouth to ask with a smile. "Looks rather lovable." Lu Junyao cast a cold glance her way. "You'd better not let little monster hear that, or he'll deal with you good and proper." The smile on the edges of Meiji's lips stiffened for an instant before she said a little sheepishly, "I wouldn't dare say this in front of him. It's not as if I am courting death." "You've got to be joking." With that petty and small-minded personality of her little monster back home, not to mention her praising any male creature, she couldn't even give them a second look if she wanted. Moreover, with the kind of seductive look she was born with, she really had to behave herself all the time. Lu Junyao snorted disdainfully. "Go do what you have to do. What are you sticking around here for?" Meiji rubbed her nose, feeling a little embarrassed. "Really can't escape the Lord's eyes. He sees right through me. Why are you standing there in a daze? Come on in." Lu Junyao said when he saw the youth standing hesitantly in his spot, and he curved up the ends of his lips to say softly. Qing Bei then turned his appraising gaze away, and a look of uneasiness came to show on his handsome-looking face. For some unknown reason, the man Qing Yu was so familiar with back when he was always appearing before his eyes before, when seen in another place now, suddenly felt so vastly different, but he just could not put into words what that reason was. Qing Bei followed behind the man without a word, and saw quite a number of people in similar dress who looked like the man's subordinates along the way. Every single one of them bowed and greeted him respectfully, showing complete deference and worship towards the man before them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Qing Bei witnessed all this with his own eyes, and he started to think just what kind of an identity did this man possess. Unknowingly, Qing Bei had been brought to a place that was completely different from the vast and majestic architecture that had been filled with darkness they had been surrounded by before. It was like an independent world that stood isolated from everything else around, with a beautiful rocks and a pristine waters, an elegant pavilion sitting right in the middle of the water. Walking across a long stone arcing bridge, there was a good, adequately sized courtyard. Many unknown flowers and foliage were planted outside in the courtyard, and stone tables with stone chairs sat in a corner to provide people with a resting corner, the entire place warm and comfortable looking. The thing that surprised Qing Bei was not the fact that he was able to see a place like this in cloud heaven, but it was because he found everything before his eyes was extremely familiar to him. Chapter 239. 2. Towards me. She has always been very passionate. The quaint little courtyard was actually an exact replica of the tranquil abode he had lived in back at the Eternal Peace Duke's manor. Even the foliage around the courtyard were very much like the plants Qingyu had planted in leisure back in the past. It had almost been a year since they had left to go to the Faint Mist sect, and they had not gone back since. Upon seeing the place now, Qingbei realized that he actually missed the place quite a bit. Qingbei looked at the man beside him in surprise. Why would he build a place that was exactly the same as the tranquil abode here? Lu Junyao laughed and said, "You will be staying here from now on?" "Why?" Qingbei did not feel any delight in his heart, but went on to knit his brows together to say, "You got your people to bring me all the way here to Cloud Heaven just to tell me this? I just want to know where Qingyu is." "Of course I did not bring you here just to tell you this." Lu Junyao lowered his gaze to look at the youth. "You do not have to worry about Qingyu. I will naturally protect my people, and you will just have to ensure your own well-being." He had just heard what he did not like to hear again. Qingbei's face darkened for a moment before he said slowly, "When did Qingyu become one of your people? Aren't you just helping us to find our mother? Aren't you just one of mother's friends? Does that really matter?" Lu Junyao raised an eyebrow, feeling rather amused. This kid seems to have some veiled meaning behind his words. "Since you're a friend of our mother's, that means that you should be quite advanced in age already, and basing on the lifespans of people in Cloud Heaven, you would be a few hundred years old at least." Qingbei said all that without any expression on his face, except for a slight gritting of his teeth right at the very end. "You're making a move on your friend's daughter, and being so much older than her. Don't you feel guilty about it at all?" Hearing those words, Lu Junyao was highly tickled. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It was a while before he laughed softly and spoke. "Who said that one cannot fall for a friend's daughter? Moreover, you know that the lifespans of people in Cloud Heaven are very long, where some even live thousands of years. People my age here are no different from men in their 20s where you are from, so there is no problem with our ages here." Qingbei was not prepared to accept that. To think that the future brother-in-law he had imagined many times before might turn out to be this man. Even if that is the case, that does not mean that Qingyu would like you in return. Qingbei said angrily, "She is strong-headed and stubborn, and if you try to force her to be with you, she will never ever submit." That was how he comforted himself in his heart, thinking that it was all just the man's one-sided wishful thinking. But the action the man took in the next moment made him feel as if he had been struck by lightning. Upon hearing his words, Lu Junyao first smiled through stiff lips pressed tightly together, before he innocuously tugged at the collar of his clothes to reveal his neck a little bit more. Chapter 239. 3. Towards me. She has always been very passionate. Qingbei had initially been puzzled by what the man was doing, but after the man pulled his collar and it came loose, a faint red mark could be seen on that fair white neck. Upon a closer look, Qingbei then saw that it looked like teeth marks. Before Qingbei could even react, Lu Junyao's deep voice sounded a little hoarsely. "You do not have to worry about that. Towards me. She has always been very passionate." Those teeth marks were from last night's escapade when he was bitten by the young lady in punishment, although she had not bitten him all that hard. But it had been enough to leave a mark, and it had turned into a sensual-looking blot on his neck. Qingbei felt his eyes sting as he stared, his face turning white with anger, and it was a long while before he was able to calm himself. He had not thought that Qingyu had grown to become so intimate with this man, but his anger had not overtaken his concern for Qingyu's personal safety. He had not forgotten what Bai Jiyin had said earlier, that Qingyu was not here with them. He could not help but open his mouth to ask, "Where is Qingyu right now? I want to go see her." "You can't do that right now," Lu Junyao said as he readjusted his collar slowly. "Why?" "She is in the Bright Moon Temple, and that isn't a place that anyone can gain entry into." Lu Junyao had paused for a moment before deciding to tell him. Bright Moon Temple. Qingbei fell silent and did not say anything else. He knew that Lu Junyao was not lying to him about that place. He would not be able to go into that place unless someone from the Bright Moon Temple were to bring him in. Seeming to have sensed the youth's disappointment, Lu Junyao patted the youth reassuringly on his shoulder. There is no need to look so discouraged. I will tell her that you've come to Cloud Heaven so that she can set her mind at ease. You should not be worrying about anything else right now. The most important thing now is to focus on raising your cultivation level. I know. Qingbei had naturally been able to sense that the spirit energy here was more abundant here than in the constellation continent, and that practicing his cultivation here will increase his progress by several folds, speeding his advancement. Lu Junyao nodded his head. Be at ease and stay here for a period. When the time comes, I will then send you to where your father is. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. These were rather troubled times, and it wasn't safe for the kid here. Only in the barbarian tribes' territories who had secluded themselves from the world for many years would he be safest. The moment those words came out of his mouth, Qingbei was completely stunned. His good-looking phoenix-like eyes stared, and it took him a while before he regained his senses. What did you just say? Chapter 239. 4. Towards me. She has always been very passionate. He paused for a moment before saying with a nod. That's right. Your father. He is chieftain of the barbarian tribe, and you will meet him in time to come. You do not have to be nervous about it. Not get nervous? How could he possibly not get nervous? Without knowing anything in advance, such a crushingly heavy piece of news was thrown right onto him so suddenly. He had not even had time to digest the news that his mother was still alive yet when he was suddenly told where his father is. It was a little too much for his little heart to take. Seeming to have sensed the menacing anger rising up in the youth, Lu Junyao shrugged his shoulders in helplessness as he said, I had thought that the little lass would have told you, but it seems like she did not want you to be too worried and did not want to make you feel so much pressure. Qingbei's stiff lips were pressed tightly together, and he did not respond. And he knew that all too well. Qingyu had never shown her weak and frail side to people before. Even when they came to know that their parents were not dead, she had not shown the slightest helplessness or a single moment of being lost, but had just said reassuringly to him, Little Bei, I will definitely find you your family and bring you to them. That's right. His family. She had always been very clear about it. She isn't the real Qingyu, and she isn't from this world. The day will come where she will leave. But she had probably never noticed it herself that she had become more and more immersed into her character, to really become Qingyu in this world, his elder sister. He was also incredibly grateful for that fire back then, that allowed Qingyu to be resurrected with a completely different soul, that was so powerful and shone with new brilliance. The barbarian tribe, you're really not going to stay? Yen Shu's face that had been highly weathered by time was looking stern and forbidding as usual. Mo Jingyu seemed like he wasn't very used to seeing him look so serious, and he punched the man lightly on the shoulder as he said with a laugh, Why the long face? It's not as if we're parting in death. What are you going to do? Yen Shu asked with his eyes narrowed, not allowing the man to change the subject by trying to laugh it off. Mo Jingyu sighed in helplessness. I knew that I would not be able to hide it from you. I really have something that I must do this time. Is it that thing from before? Yen Shu creased his brows and asked. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Mo Jingyu laughed coldly, and a malevolent glint came over his black jade eyes. Never had anyone been able to plot against me and still remain safe and sound. Even when it's a woman, I will not show any mercy. If your mind is set on it, then go do what you have to. Yen Shu said as he turned around, his foot raised as he walked away slowly. I only hope that you do not come back wounded and injured. When did I become so useless in your eyes? Mo Jingyu queried as he gazed upon the man's back, looking at the hair on his head that had turned half gray though they were of the same age. A glint flashed fleetingly in his eyes for an instant, but disappeared immediately. Yen Shu, my life does not belong to me alone anymore, and I will not let myself fall back into the same state I was in before. That will be the best. Chapter 240. 1. A familiar scent. When Mo Jingyu went to look for his wife, he was surprised to see that there was a little girl in her room as well. Feeling a little puzzled, he remained standing outside the door and did not go in. Big Sister Fei, Can you not go? Little you can't bear to see you leave. The soft, puerile voice of the little girl gushed with great reluctance. You arched up an eyebrow. When did Fei become acquainted with such a young little girl in the barbarian tribe? Inside the room, Qing Lan Fei looked at the little girl leaning on her arm, and her beautiful face smiled a little helplessly. I can't bear to leave you too, but I have something very important that I need to go deal with. I promise that I'll come back to visit, all right? Can't you bring Ayu with you? The little girl asked in a pleading voice. The moment those words came out, Qing Lan Fei then realized something and she raised an eyebrow up slightly. Ayu, tell me honestly, are you thinking of sneaking out to play behind your grandfather's back? The young girl's pretty face looked a little embarrassed for a moment before her lips pouted sadly to say in a soft voice, That isn't true at all. Qing Lan Fei had seen through what the little girl was thinking immediately, and although she liked the little girl very much, she was not going to be fooled by her so easily. She then said in a tender voice filled with concern, You are still very young and the world outside is filled with dangers that you cannot even begin to imagine. You will have to wait till you have become very strong and possess the ability to protect yourself before you can step out into the world. Ayu did not fully understand it, but she still nodded her head obediently. I'll listen to Big Sister Fei. Then, will you really come back here in future? Of course I will. Qing Lan Fei nodded her head and smiled. Ayu's large limpid eyes then lit up with delight as she hugged Qing Lan Fei's waist, looking like a adorable little kitten. Seeing that, Jingyu coughed lightly and then came in through the door. When Ayu saw the man she had never seen before come in, she jumped up in shock. But when she took a closer look at him, she seemed to feel that she had seen that man before somewhere. She blinked her eyes a few times. A good while passed before she finally came to recall, and she started to stutter in disbelief. Aren't you from the Forbidden Chambers? That pretty boy that the chieftain has been secretly keeping as a mistress? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Secretly keeping as a mistress? Pretty boy? Upon hearing that, Jingyu's face immediately turned dark while Qing Lan Fei could not help but burst out into peals of uncontrollable laughter. This little girl really says the darndest things. Can you really use the term mistress on a man like this? But as Yen Shu was already looking like a wizened middle-aged uncle while Jingyu was young and handsome compared to him, it could really look like that if one let his thoughts run wild. Chapter 240. 2. A familiar scent, and Qing Lan Fei was mischievously amused by that thought. Seeing the man's dark, gloomy face, Ayu was not intimidated, but was instead looking uncomprehendingly at him with her head tilted to one side. Am I mistaken? You are clearly the man lying inside the Forbidden Chambers. When I tailed the chieftain in the past, I saw that he often went to see you secretly and said many things to you. He even said that he missed you. Jingyu's face could not be described with the word dark and gloomy anymore, as it had turned so dark that it looked like ink was going drip down. Qing Lan Fei kept her head lowered at the side, fighting very hard to contain the laughter that was threatening to burst out. However, her shoulders that were shaking uncontrollably betrayed the gloating glee she was feeling inside right at that moment. You cannot really blame her, as picturing Yen Shu and Jingyu together in such a warm and harmonious scene was such a sight that she could not help being tickled by it. Jingyu glared indignantly at the little girl's innocent face before he reached out and pulled Qing Lan Fei to him. He then complained in a grumbling tone, Even you are making fun of me as well. Qing Lan Fei immediately restrained the wide smile on her face and shook her head as she said, I wasn't making fun of you. I just think that Yen Shu really treats you rather well. He is like a brother. Of course he treats me well. How could Jingyu possibly not know what she was really thinking? But he just did not want to expose her. He glanced at the little girl at the side and said, Let's go then. I've already bid goodbye to Yen Shu. All right. Bright Moon Temple. After the confrontation that day, Qing Luo Fei did not get anyone to come summon Qingyu again. It wasn't just because of that cool countenance that looked so much like a certain someone, but it was also due to the fact that Qingyu wasn't like any other normal little lass. She looked like someone that would be easy to bully, but was actually a person capable of pretending to be a pig to eat up a tiger. Since there was still some remaining doubt, Qing Luofei decided to keep her around while she unravels the mystery in her heart. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Qing, as an attendant, you're not doing your duty but just hides here in idleness. Do you think it appropriate? A familiar cold voice called out angrily, waking the groggy Qing Yu up from slumber. She yawned lazily, and her eyes were still a little dazed as she said in a slightly raspy voice, still heavy with sleep, "What happened?" That fellow Lu Junyao had come and kept her awake for a greater part of the night. He never failed to take liberties with her every time he came over, using the convenient excuse that he wanted to make sure that she had not been bullied or hurt anywhere, which was highly taxing on her both in mind and body. She was just barely able to get some rest after he left, but before light had even broken over the horizon, this man had come to disturb her sleep. How infuriating! Chapter 243. A familiar sent the young lady with exquisite facial features lay on the bed of soft clouds with her long hair spread a little messily over it. Her phoenix-like eyes were half open, still a little misty from being awakened from her slumber, looking exceptionally beautiful and lovable, and that heart-stirring raspy voice having just been roused up from sleep would really be irresistible to any man. What's more, for these young hot-blooded men in the divine temple who had practiced abstinence for hundreds of years. The moment Yufan heard the young lady's voice, he immediately froze in place, and when he saw that languid and alluring figure, his entire body immediately felt as if there was something wrong, unable to take his eyes off her. He stood there in a daze as he stared at that groggy-looking young lady, unable to recover his senses for a good long while. When Qing Yu finally came awake from her groggy daze and saw the man standing dumbly in front of her, she arched up an eyebrow and asked, "What is it? What did you just say?" When she asked that, Yu Fan seemed like he was shocked awake, where he immediately did an about turn to leave, without saying a single word. Qing Yu was left there dumbfounded in befuddlement. What was that all about? A corner of Qing Yu's lips twitched in speechlessness, making her feel that everyone in that place were all strange and eccentric. She had initially been feeling rather sleepy, and after being awoken in shock like that, she decided she was not going back to sleep anymore. She then got up and slowly walked out from the place. There were still a few flickering stars hanging under the still dark sky. Qing Yu was entranced for a moment, staring into that starry sky. For some unknown reason, she had actually felt as if she was able to understand something among them. Before she knew it, she raised her foot and started walking in a particular direction. By the time she realized it, she found that she was already in a place she did not know at all. The Bright Moon Divine Temple's grounds were filled with many strangely shaped palaces and fortresses of all sorts, some big, some small, all over the place, making the place feel like a gigantic maze. Unless one was familiar with the topography of the area, one would surely become lost in there. And that was exactly the case for Qing Yu right at that moment. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She came to discover in sorrow that she seemed to be lost. So how was she going to find her way back? If she was discovered by anyone, they might think that she was trying to escape. Just as she was feeling depressed about the situation, the sounds of a slight commotion reached her from a short distance away. Qing Yu raised her eyes up in surprise and saw a place that was stood out like a sore thumb against every other place in the Bright Moon Temple grounds. Like it had been scorched by a huge fire, it was falling apart in many places. The jade pillars and beams lay in a pile, crisscrossing over each other, like it had been abandoned and left in ruins for many years, till it was impossible to tell what it looked like originally. Chapter 244. A familiar scent. What is this place? She was still feeling puzzled when she heard the same sound again. Driven by curiosity, she began walking slowly towards that worn and dilapidated palatial-looking building. But before she had even gotten close to it, a shadow suddenly appeared before her eyes, standing with her back facing her. His voice was a little dark and sinister as he said, "Entry to the place is prohibited. Qingyu was surprised for a moment before she came to say with a laugh, "My apologies. It was unintentional. I stumbled my way here by accident, and I do not know my way back. May I ask if you can point me in the right direction?" The shadow did not give her any response, but seeing that Qingyu did not seem to harbor any bad intentions, he then relaxed his guard. Although Qingyu thought that this was rather strange, she was however not too familiar with this place. So she did not give it much further thought and just turned herself around, deciding to leave. But without knowing how, her hand was suddenly pricked by a sharp object beside her and blood immediately began to drip down. At that same moment, a golden red star suddenly flashed brightly across the dusky dim sky, disappearing in the very next instant. It happened so quickly that one would think that they had just imagined it. Although the flash of light had passed really quickly, a couple of people still managed to catch that strange phenomenon. One of those people was the leader of the Bright Moon Temple's Grand Priests, Zhangjian, and the other one. Qingyu's brows were creased up as she looked at the wound on the back of her hand. A gust of wind suddenly blew the doors of the palace in front wide open, and a woman in an orange dress came walking out slowly from within. Long jet black hair draped the back of her shoulders, over a very skinny frame, making her look like a floating wraith as she glided her way over right before Qingyu. Qingyu blinked her eyes in surprise as she stared at the person in front of her. The two large limpid black eyes upon the sharp pointed oval face made her look even more pitifully frail, seemingly younger than Qingyu in age. But when she opened her mouth, it was a woman's voice that sounded highly familiar, sounding a little ill at ease. "Can I take a look at your wound?" Qingyu was taken aback a moment, unable to react to her words. But in the very next second, she found that her hand was held within the woman's grasp. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. There was no temperature from the woman's touch, the icy chill almost seeping right into her bones. But that was not the thing that surprised her the most. The woman held her hand and slowly leaned in closer, before she placed her lips over where she had been hurt, murmuring softly, "This is the princess sent." The place where her lips touched then began to give out a faint gentle glow, and the wound healed in an instant to its originally unblemished state, leaving not a single trace of a scar or faintest mark. Qingyu's eyes widened in surprise, and she instinctively pulled her hand back to inspect it carefully. She discovered that her hand had healed completely without the slightest blemish, and she was just about to open her mouth to offer her thanks when she saw that the woman had broken into a warm smile. That pair of large black eyes were misty as she said, "You've finally come back." After saying that, the black shadow summoned up his spirit energy and transformed it into a dagger. He was just about to draw it across his forearm, but before he could even make his move, the dagger was suddenly sent flying through the air with a flick of the woman's sleeve. "I do not need you to make my decisions for me. Even if I were to die, I will never ever use such unorthodox and evil to extend my life, but will choose to struggle right at death's door." The woman's breath sounded rather weak, her face white as a sheet. But even then, needing to pause between each word, her voice was resolute as she uttered those words. The person leading the people is Zhangjian. The expression on the woman's face finally showed a ripple of emotion as a strangely chilling smile slowly blossomed at the edges of her lips. "Ha! To think he still dares to show himself here." Chapter 241. 3. Secret Massacre. After saying that, she then told the Black Shadow, "Bring the princess to hide in the secret tunnel first. Without my orders, do not come out. Grand Priestess, with your current power, you will not be able to stand against Zhangjian." The Black Shadow had not even finished his sentence when the rest of his words were drowned out by the woman's eyes that had turned to become red as blood in an instant. Her lips parted to spit out just one curt word: "Go." The Black Shadow did not say anything to argue further, but just lowered his head to say, "Yes." He then turned around to bow respectfully before Qingyu. "Princess, please come with your subordinate. At almost the same instant they just stepped into the secret tunnel, the palace's already shaky and vulnerable main doors were suddenly viciously thrown wide open by a violent force from outside. Outside the door, the tall figure of a man with extraordinarily handsome looks stood in the lead, wearing deep blue priest robes, looking exceptionally eye-catching against the others beside him who were dressed in black or white robes, as he stood with a faint smile on the corner of his lips. In contrast to the large horde of aggressive-looking men outside the door, the lone thin and frail-looking woman with a refined-looking countenance standing within looked so weak and helpless. But one would be unable to find the slightest sliver of panic or helplessness on the woman, the indifferent expression on her face unchanged from beginning to end. In that thin, skinny figure, it felt as if the woman's body hid boundless power, making it impossible to underestimate her. When Song Jian saw the woman inside the palace, his expression was startled for a moment, like he had seen someone he had not met for a very long time, or that he was looking at a person who should not exist in this world, but had suddenly appeared before his eyes, which shocked or surprised him. The person before his eyes was someone he was familiar with. Many years ago, within the icy-cold divine temple, this person was the only bit of color in this place. He slowly came to move his lips, opening his mouth to speak in disbelief. "Chi Yu?" The woman's slightly lowered eyelids moved ever so slightly, before she slowly raised her head to look up. The deep black darkness in those eyes stirred the man's heart, and her voice had a slight raspiness as she said, "Grand Priest Song Jian, I trust you've been well." Those words that could not have been any more ordinary, however, caused Song Jian's eyes to narrow. It was after a good while before he opened his mouth to say very slowly, "Chi Yu, you've always addressed me as senior. Why? Are you being so distant? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." "EU senior?" The woman slowly repeated the word and then paused before she laughed. Could Grand Priest Song Jian be mistaken somewhere? "My fellow senior, the man called Yin Lu, a kind-hearted person who abhorred evil with a vengeance? Didn't he die in that brutal and ruthless massacre that happened many years back?" Song Jian's heart suddenly wrenched up painfully. Yin Lu. It was a name that he had not heard for so many years. Chapter 241. 4. Secret Massacre. It sounded so foreign, but also so familiar to him at the same time. "Chi Yu, don't call out my name. You're not worthy." Seeing her so resolutely cold, Song Jian's hands could not help but clench up tightly under his sleeves. Seemingly after an intense struggle, he finally came to blow out one long breath before calling out sharply in a deep voice, "Search! What do you think you're doing?" Chi Yu's eyes darkened, her complexion turning an ugly shade. "It's not enough that you've become someone's lackey for so many years. Are you going to shatter this last sliver of tranquility of mine as well?" Song Jian lowered his gaze, like he did not want to see the hatred and disappointment in the woman's eyes. "Chi Yu, you have been very intelligent since you were very young, and have been good at reading the situation and looking into people's hearts. You knew how to elicit people's sympathy and pick on their soft spots to cover up things that you wish to hide and do not want people to find out. But have you forgotten? In this world, you are indeed the person who understands me the most, but I am also the one that knows you best." Song Jian walked towards the woman, approaching a step at a time. Under the flickering candlelight, the tall, towering figure looked as though it was going to swallow up the thin figure completely. "But so many years have passed and I have changed, while you have not changed in the slightest." Song Jian slowly finished his words, before his gaze suddenly stared with a cold glint towards a particular spot. That spot was the secret tunnel that Chi Yu had asked the Black Shadow to bring Qing Yu to hide in. "Chi Yu, I wonder if you saw that phenomenon in the sky earlier? Both you and I are the most outstanding ones in the line of priests, and only our eyes would be able to capture that kind of a strange phenomenon." Song Jing laughed softly as he looked at the woman's pretty and exquisite countenance, when the face that was always calm and confident actually came to show a flash of panic for a brief instant. "That omen was tinged with our god's aura. So that means that the destined one has appeared, isn't it?" Song Jing walked past the woman's pale, shocked countenance, making his way towards the location of the hidden secret tunnel, the expression on his face turning malevolent. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Why are you putting up such a futile struggle? The Bright Moon Temple would never tolerate such heretics, who will find that there is no escape but only death in the end. With a cold shout from Song Jian, the deep blue priest robes moved to draw a graceful arc under the night sky, and the wide voluminous sleeves billowed up with a powerful gust of wind, carrying such terrifying force that it seemed like it would obliterate the entire palace into nothing if the wind struck it. No, Chi Yu's eyes were wide as she stared, a broken cry tearing out from her throat, filled with so much sadness and hopelessness. No, that's her princess. Chapter 242. 1. Had he seen a ghost? However, the thing that everyone expected to see did not happen. After the powerfully turbulent hurricane passed, what came to be revealed before everyone's eyes was a tattered wall, its original look wrecked beyond recognition. Not to mention people. Even the secret tunnel hidden behind it was not revealed. Song Jian stared incredulously in disbelief. How is that possible? There's nothing. He had clearly detected an unusual aura hidden behind that spot. How did it suddenly disappear? Similarly caught in a shock daze was Chi Yu. But besides a sharp shrinking of the irises within her eyes, she did not show much of a change in emotion on her face. Her fingernails that were digging into her palms slightly relaxed a little, and she came to discover that her tightly clenched fists were covered in cold sweat from fear. Is everything fine now? The princess isn't in there. Does that mean she is safe now? By the time Song Jian turned to look, not a single ripple of emotion could be seen on Chi Yu's face anymore, turned into a cold, indifferent mask like she did not know anything. The expression on her face had clearly been panicked earlier and had even been tinged with a sliver of fearful trepidation. So Song Jian was not going to let himself be fooled by her so easily. The corners of his lips split into an arc of indiscernible meaning. Chi Yu, did you do something? My senses have never been wrong, and I detected more than one spirit aura within this palace. Where? Is the person who carries the bloodline of the god? What nonsense are you spouting? Chi Yu scoffed coldly with a laugh. That venomous woman laid a curse on me, and my cultivation was completely destroyed, turning me into someone who is neither human nor ghost, who can do nothing but wait here slowly for my life to wither away till my last dying breath leaves this body. What do you suppose that I am capable of doing in my current state? As expected, the moment that person was mentioned, the expression on Song Jian's face immediately changed. His handsome face flashed with displeasure for a moment. I will not allow you to besmirch the Temple Lord's name. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Iyugha, Temple Lord? Chi Yu laughed loudly. That animal who is devoid of humanity is fit to be the Temple Lord. Besides that pretty face she maintains through evil techniques, what does she possess that is worth having you do her bidding, even at the expense of you violating the vows you made when you chose to take up the position of a priest? I've said that I will not allow you to slander the Temple Lord. Song Jian's eyes flashed with a dark glint, and his body moved speedily to come right before Chi Yu in an instant, before grabbing Chi Yu viciously by the neck. Chi Yu's lips curled up further in a scornful smile. Although she was already finding it hard to breathe and was pacing right before death's door, there was absolutely no fear showing on her face. Kill me if you can. Song Jian's voice was malevolent as he replied. You think I do not dare to? But at the very moment murderous intent rose up in his heart, a powerful oppression suddenly surged towards him, giving him no choice but to release his grip and take several steps back in retreat. Chapter 242. 2. Had he seen a ghost? Shock showed on his face, and he raised his voice to shout. Who is playing these tricks while hiding? Show yourself to me. As soon as his voice fell, that strange power then lifted his entire body up into the air, before tossing him viciously out of the place. The palace's main doors then shut tightly with a boom right after, where they stood impenetrable and still, no matter how the people outside tried to force their way in. Fantastically strange. What just happened here? Song Jian came to his feet as his subordinates helped him up. His face was deathly pale as he vomited out a mouthful of blood. Grand Priest, the doors cannot be opened. After two black-robed men found that their powerful strikes on the door had absolutely no effect, they immediately went to Song Jian to report it. Song Jian wiped the trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth and stared at the tightly shut doors into the palace, suspicion rising up in his eyes. Just who could possibly possess the ability to do this and was even able to injure him? Although his cultivation was in the study of priesthood, but his powers was great enough for him to hold his own in cloud heaven and to achieve such a high position in the divine temple. Although his powers could not be said to be unparalleled, but it was considered to be of a superior level. If it was really the destined one who inherited the god's bloodline, Song Jian narrowed his eyes. Forget it. He must investigate this clearly before he reports it to the temple lord. We retreat for now. Inside the palace, after Song Jian was tossed out of the place, the shaky and badly battered wall suddenly collapsed. Where there was nothing to be seen before, when the entire secret tunnel was revealed before their eyes, Qing Yu and the Black Shadow came walking slowly out from within. Qi Yu was a little stunned. Princess, just now? What could have happened? How did the secret tunnel disappear? That was just too unbelievable. Seeing the shock that was showing in that pair of large eyes, Qing Yu went on to explain calmly, that was nothing. As the secret tunnel wasn't that large in area, I was able to keep it away very quickly. That man would not have noticed anything strange just now. Those words spoken so matter-of-factly, however, stunned Qi Yu further into a speechless daze for a very long while. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, keep it away? Did she just hear those words correctly? How do you keep something like a secret tunnel away? And that secret tunnel was at least several hundred meters long, able to allow more than 10 men to walk abreast in there. She actually said that it wasn't that large an area? Qing Yu arched up an eyebrow as she looked at the astounded look on the woman's face like she had just seen a ghost. Although she did not really understand it, she went on to open her mouth to ask, people from Cloud Heaven would not find a simple technique like this unfamiliar, would you? It's called spatial time shift. I had merely shifted the tunnel to another place just now and set up an illusion in its place. No matter how high one's level of cultivation is, they would not be able to see through it. Chapter 242. 3. Had he seen a ghost? Given such a short period of time, she was only able to shift the secret tunnel into her own dimensional space. But as that was a secret, she was not ready to reveal it. Hearing her explanation, Qi Yu started to understand. Her eyes were filled with reverent worship as she then said, "The princess has really grown stronger. I just knew that you would be blessed and would come out safe. You've really mistaken me for someone else. I am not any kind of princess at all." Qing Yu said a little helplessly as she covered her palm over her face. She was not going to impersonate herself to take on the identity of another person. Hearing that, Qi Yu merely gave a soft sigh. I do not know why the princess is not willing to acknowledge our relationship, but I will never forget the princess. Back then, among the many princesses, only you were like the god the most, and was most qualified to inherit the divine temple. A pity. Wait. Qing Yu blinked her eyes as she seemed to realize something. This woman has mistaken her for her mother, calling her princess and talking about the god who was once the lord of the divine temple. She would be really stupid if she still didn't realize it. So this woman is an old acquaintance of her mother's, and was very loyal to her as well. What a great reward this encounter had come to reap. From the look of things, the woman definitely knows quite a bit about the things that happened in the divine temple back then. It must be because she knows too much and posed to be a threat. That was why that woman laid a curse on her and kept her imprisoned in this place. In that case, then it would not do any harm to acknowledge the relationship. Decided, Qing Yu then smiled and said, "In your eyes, do I really look so much like the princess you were talking about?" Qi Yu was taken aback by surprise. What does she mean? But she then went on to scrutinize the young lady, carefully studying her countenance and mannerisms. Something seems a little off. The young lady in front of her looks a little younger. Although the princess, who was already a few hundred years old, still looked like a budding young woman, compared to this young lady here, the princess had a tad bit more maturity in her, and that was a change that would only come after one had experienced quite a bit in their life. In that aspect, this young lady was a little bit different. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. She has really been mistaken? With that thought in mind, Chiyu's face immediately fell sullen. You, don't be so hasty. I haven't finished. Qingyu interjected, her eyes smiling as she said, Aren't you curious why I look so much like that princess that you know? That is because she is my mother. Chiyu's sullen rage immediately turned into a stunned daze. What did you just say? She still could not believe her ears. Chapter 242. 4. Had he seen a ghost? Although it was rumored back then that the princess was indeed together with a man, and it had even spread to become such hot, juicy gossip, she did not believe a word of it. And a young lady who looked so much like the princess had now come to tell her that she was the princess' daughter. Seeing the woman looking like she was shocked right to her soul, Qingyu sighed helplessly before her slim fingers snapped crisply. A ball of golden red flame immediately appeared at the tip of her finger, which illuminated the dim surroundings. This should be enough to make you believe now, wouldn't it? Qingyu asked. It's the phoenix fire. Qiyu cried out in a slightly broken voice, her eyes immediately turning red. This is the princess divine fire. How could she possibly not recognize it? This young lady's really of the princess bloodline. To say how Qingyu came to know about this, the credit must go to Lu Junyao. Back when she was still in the Constellation continent, he had already given her quite a lot of information about advancing through her cultivation levels. When they first met, that guy had already shown a lot of interest in the strange and unique elixir fire she possessed. She had then looked further into it and came to find out that her elixir fire was called the Phoenix Fire, and was not something that one would be able to gain by cultivating, but something that one was born with, a kind of power inherited through one's bloodline. That would also mean that either this body's father or mother had the power of Phoenix Fire in them. And after she saw the Phoenix divine beast in the cave within the forbidden ground, Lu Junyao had said that it was her mother's contracted divine beast, so the person who possessed the power of Phoenix Fire would most definitely be her mother. It must be said that her guesswork was spot on and right on the mark. Qiyu greets the little princess. After ascertaining her identity, Qiyu immediately knelt with her body flat on the ground, paying Qingyu the most respectful homage a servant could show to her mistress. Qingyu quickly helped the woman up to her feet. Dispense with all these superficial formalities and just call me Qingyu. My mother is no longer any kind of princess anymore, so you had better not address me with such a title. Hearing that, Qiyu furrowed her brows together. That wouldn't be appropriate. There's nothing inappropriate about that. Just do as I've said. Qingyu told her. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World.
I will.
Rest assured that I will not let you just die like this. I will definitely think of a way to dispel the curse you've been afflicted with. Qingyu said in a serious tone as she held the woman's hands. Qiyu's eyes narrowed as she started to shake her head lightly. It's no use. I am a grand priestess myself, but I have absolutely no idea on how I can break this evil curse at all. Just trust me. I will definitely do it. Don't you want to be able to see my mother again, but allow yourself your life to end in regret like this? The young lady's voice was tender, and it was imbued with a strangely convincing power. Chiyu's heart winced with a vicious tug. Finally, she raised her eyes and said slowly, her voice pausing hesitatingly between each word, I want to live. Chapter 243. 1. Robbery? White Finn's lands. After the group of people from the Evil Purgers Coalition led by Qing Yili dealt with the Feng family, they finally left. And Qing Tianlin, who had been suppressing his rage and malevolence all this time, finally came to realize that he had forgotten something very important after being liberated from all that hassle. With a light flick of his sleeves, a ball of misty smoke appeared before him that came to show the figure of a man inside. That person was Shi Zhanchun, who was kneeling with one knee on the ground. He then said respectfully, "I have not been able to get in touch with you over this period to report that I am unable to detect any sign of Qing Yu's aura anymore. She has disappeared without a trace for a very long time." "What did you say?" Rage was almost threatening to spill out from Qing Tianlin's eyes. "What do you mean by disappearing without a trace?" She could very possibly have been taken away by people from the upper realm, and her brother is not in the faint mist sect anymore as well. I sent people to go speak with people who were on rather good terms with Qing Yu, and according to what they said, Qing Yu had never stepped out from the faint mist sect, but has been missing for tens of days. My guess is that some highly skilled person must have taken her out of there without anyone knowing, Shi Zhanchun explained. Hearing that, Qing Tianlin could not help but laughed out coldly. That's just preposterous. Even if Qing's cultivation has become a lot more inferior than before after being reborn, it couldn't possibly be that easy for anyone to take her away without anyone knowing. Moreover, she had those 2 secret treasures in her body, and just that weapon spirit Zhongmai was a weapon that not anyone was able to stand against. With that thought in mind, Qing Tianlin then said in a deep low voice, "Make your way up to the White Fins lands this instant. I will get people to search around here, and if they come up with nothing." His voice paused for a moment, and his long, narrow eyes gazed far away into the distance. "Then I will go have a look up there in Cloud Heaven." In both his previous life and this one, what he lacked was just Qing. Maybe he had used the wrong method in the previous life that made Qing give such an extreme reaction. In this life, he was definitely not going to let her leave him so easily. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Once he has her, everything would be settled. The barbarian tribe was a reclusive race of people, and the location of their headquarters encampment was not known to anyone. The only known fact was that it sat within a vast and endless desert. Besides the usual large sandstorms that were usually seen, there was nothing special about the place. But once night fell, that was when the desert was most dangerous. Under the illumination of moonlight, those storms would turn into a massive and gigantic head of a beast, swallowing up intruders with nefarious intentions. Even in the day, not many people would come to this place, unless it was an elixir cultivator who had come here to search for rare herbs, the place seldom seeing anyone pass by at all. Chapter 243. 2. Robbery? The sun was hanging low over the western horizon when a horse carriage suddenly appeared out of nowhere, slowly trundling over the sand. The wind gently lifted a corner of the carriage's curtain. A figure in red and a figure in black were seen leaning close against each other, their demeanor intimate. Those 2 people were Qing Lanfei and Imo Jingyu, who had just come out from the barbarian tribe's headquarters. Passing over this familiar piece of sandy land, Qing Lanfei could not help but curve up her lips, seeming rather emotional. "Several months ago, I was still a highly fragmented soul. This was where I met you, who brought me back to the barbarian tribe." Imo Jingyu sighed and embraced her tightly. "I've made you suffer. It's all my fault." Qing Lanfei shook her head and her limpid eyes looked straight at the man as she said, "The fact that you have returned is the greatest blessing to me." Imo Jingyu was taken aback a moment, and it was not known what he had suddenly recalled, before he then laughed softly. "What are you laughing about?" Qing Lanfei raised an eyebrow as she asked, feeling a little puzzled. "I am recalling how heartless you were towards me back then, and you would never have said such tender words to me at that time." When Imo Jingyu remembered that, his heart still felt a twinge of aggrievement. Upon hearing that, Qing Lanfei looked at him with an angry glint in her eyes. "Isn't that because you were always so flippant and was such a philanderer?" Whoa, as she spoke, the horse carriage suddenly jolted violently and lurched forward. Qing Lanfei was caught off guard and was going to fall out when Imo Jingyu's eyes turned sharp, moving quickly to hold her protectively in his arms as he summoned up his spirit powers to steady the horse carriage. "Hey, You've got quite a few moves, haven't you? Wonder if there is anything that's worth some money in the carriage. Sigh. I've been waiting here in these lifeless wilderness, and all I've got in return is finding my mouth filled with sand. Nary seeing a single person pass by. Today must be a very unlucky day for you. Ignoring the voice coming in from outside, Imo Jingyu went to check on the person in his arms and asked her worriedly, Fei Air, did you knock yourself anywhere? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although he had reacted very quickly to catch her immediately, Fei Air's cultivation was no longer like it was before by a far way off. Having lost fragments of her soul would definitely make her weaker. Qing Lan Fei shook her head and replied, I'm fine. You pulled me back very quickly just now, so how could I possibly be hurt anyway? Imo Jingyu was still a little worried, and he went on to check her himself. It was only after he saw that she was really unhurt that his heart was set at ease, which made Qing Lan Fei not know whether to laugh or to cry. This fellow was always so overly concerned about her. Har? Did you die in there? Aren't you going to hurry up and get that sorry behind of yours out here already? Seeing no movements coming from inside the horse carriage after such a long while, a man with a beard who looked to be around 30 years of age stared with wide-eyed anger as he roared out in rage. Chapter 243. 3. Robbery? That rough, grating voice caused Qing Lan Fei to subconsciously knit her brows, her gaze peering through the gap in the curtains to look outside. Her voice was a little surprised as she asked, Have we encountered a bunch of robbers? They haven't been here in this world for a few hundred years, and has Cloud Heaven deteriorated to become so crass where lowlifes like robbers are running rampant? TSK. They are just courting their own death. Imo Jingyu scoffed coldly, as his long, slender fingers parted the carriage's curtains, his pair of soul-stirring phoenix-like eyes gazing indifferently at the group of people standing in front, blocking their way. They had probably never seen a person with such a resplendently beautiful countenance as the moment the carriage's curtains parted. All of them, including the bearded man who had raised his voice angrily earlier, were all stunned in their spots, unable to recover their senses for a good long while. They were bedazzled and mesmerized like a bunch of besotted young girls as they stared at the beautiful-looking man. Qing Lan Fei, who was blocked behind him, had naturally seen that hilarious scene, and her lips immediately clamped up stiffly together. It was probably because she found it too funny when she suddenly burst out laughing with a loud "Buff." The slim figure moved herself, and came to be revealed as well. She was after all hailed as Cloud Heaven's greatest beauty back then, and her looks were naturally highly outstanding as well. Standing together with Imo Jingyu, a man of perfect and resplendent good looks, two words immediately came to mind: heavenly match. It was not known who was the one who gulped loudly, and then started to say mindlessly, beautiful, just too beautiful looking. I have never seen anyone with such unbelievably good looks. After the bedazzlement started to fade away, a number of them began to come back to their senses. One of them smacked a person who was drooling stupidly on the back of his head and said angrily through tightly clenched teeth, So what if they're good looking? Can good looks fill your belly? Don't forget that we are here to rob them. Upon saying that, a large shiny saber immediately flashed in his hand. A long metal chain was wrapped around its hilt, extending around the man's arm, his body exuding a menacing air. Only people who have truly seen blood spilled would give out such an aura, and it could be seen that he had committed a fair share of cruel and ruthless misdeeds. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Leave the horse carriage behind if you know what's good for you, and I can spare you your lives. Imo Jingyu thought that he was hearing things. To think that the day would come that he would experience being robbed. And what was it with this tone that sounded like he was being shown mercy? Is he then expected to gratefully go thank them and kowtow to them for it? With the kind of character he had, how could he possibly endure that? But right at that moment, a warm, gentle hand held him back lightly. Imo Jingyu turned back to gaze puzzledly at her, but saw Qing Lan Fei smile gently at him. It's never easy wandering outside like this. Since they want the carriage, just give it to them. I was thinking of getting off to have a walk around anyway. so that we can see the scenery along the way. Chapter 243. 4. Rob. Robbery? What is happening here? When did Faye become so kind and passive? No, not to say that she isn't kind-hearted, but his impression of Faye was one who was never fearful of such things, and would never allow herself to be bullied like this. But today, just as Imo Jingyu was feeling all confused and befuddled, he saw that she had slowly come to climb down from the horse carriage and had extended a hand before him with an eyebrow raised. "Aren't you coming?" Although Imo Jingyu did not understand it fully, but based on his trust in her, he held her hand as he stepped off the horse carriage. At least you know what's good for you." The man holding the large saber in his hand said with ridicule, like he despised the cowardly ways of the two people in order to preserve their own lives. Imo Jingyu's footsteps halted for a moment, almost unable to hold himself back from making his move, but then gave up on it when he saw Qing Lanfei stop him. A few of the robbers were curious about the kind of things they had in the horse carriage, and they went on ahead to part the carriage's curtains first. They had just managed to clamber their way inside when frightful howls and wails were immediately heard. Imo Jingyu had been dragged a distance away from there, and when he heard that clamor, he could not help but cast a surprised glance towards the woman beside him. "What is happening?" When the man holding the large saber saw what was happening, he went walking swiftly over to the horse carriage and shouted at the men inside. "What are all of you screaming your head off for?" It was only when he came close that he was able to see that the faces of the men were filled with many unidentifiable bugs crawling all over, scurrying around in all directions. When the man came stomping over, the bugs all flew away in an instant. But for the men who had the bugs all over their faces just now, red swollen lumps could be seen all over. It was probably because it was really itchy that made one of them lift his hand up to scratch his face. In the end, from within the tiny red swollen lumps, he dug out what looked like tiny insect larvae, which was an utterly disgusting sight. What did the two of you do? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The two people had not walked that far a distance when they were called to a halt. Qing Lanfei's face was innocent as she responded. "What? You still going to feign ignorance? Don't you see what their faces have turned into here? Did you set poison inside the carriage to draw those nefarious insects in to attack us?" The bearded man from before asked with a ferociously aggressive face, his eyes wide as symbols like he was going to eat the two of them up. "If I had set poison in there, wouldn't I have just poisoned them to death straight away? Why would I want to disfigure just their faces? Could you possibly think that I am jealous of all your good looks?" Qing Lanfei went on to say slowly at an unhurried pace, before sniffing scornfully in disdain, her face highly indignant. Imo Jingyu stifled a laugh. He had really not seen this mischievous and adorable look on his Faye for such a long time. She was just so black-bellied when she pranks people, and the words she said to the bunch of robbers would surely cause them to die from infuriation. Chapter 244. 1. Stop the killing by killing as expected. The moment the bunch of robbers heard those words filled with hidden ridicule, their faces immediately turned an ashen green. She had clearly employed some unknown method to attract all those bugs, and she was even pushing the blame back onto themselves. "You nefarious bitch. I will kill you." The bearded man who had formed a favorable impression towards the couple before because of their flawless good looks immediately became enraged, and an iron mace filled with vicious hooked spikes appeared in his hand. He charged forward straight away, right at the woman who maintained an absolutely harmless smile upon her face with a brutal strike. But before he could even get close, his entire body was suddenly sent flying back, like he had been struck by a powerfully heavy punch, blood spewing out from his mouth as he soared through the air. Qing Lanfei turned to look speechlessly at a certain man, the displeasure in her eyes undisguisable. Imo Jingyu looked at her like what he did was only natural. "I will not allow you to get hurt. It's just a few insignificant lowlifes, and I have not been weakened to such a pathetic state." Qing Lan Fei could not help but roll her eyes at him. She was merely suffering from a deficient soul and had not lost her powers completely. Does he need to get himself so worried? You've said it yourself that they are just a bunch of insignificant lowlifes. If you need to raise your hand against such worthless characters, wouldn't that make your man look like an inconsequential piece of decoration? It must be said that Imo Jingyu had a rather slick tongue, able to show consideration for his wife's feelings and innocuously display affection for her at the same time. Seeing Qing Lan Fei look at him with a pout, and her beautiful face then breaking into a bashful smile, he knew that he had succeeded in achieving his goal. But his words had, however, infuriated the bunch of ruthless robbers. To be able to roam within this desolate desert, just having guts alone would not be enough, but calls for one to possess a certain amount of powers. Otherwise, before their prey can even appear, they would have been buried under the swirling sands. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. So the bunch of robbers were not just a bunch of average nobodies. Having suffered such humiliation and burning from their scathing taunts, a murderous aura slowly exuded from their bodies, and the spirit power aura that was revealed seemed to feel rather familiar. They are from the Hunters Guild? An eyebrow on Imo Jingyu's face raised up, looking a little surprised. Several hundred years ago, there were only 4 major powers in Cloud Heaven. The Hunters Guild only came to rise in power later. It was originally thought that they were just a tiny, inconsequential power that would not last, but for some unknown reason, they grew and might very quickly later, forcibly squeezing themselves up into becoming the 5th major power in Cloud Heaven. Their members were called hunters by people outside who specialized in taking on prickly and difficult missions, a myriad mix in a bubbling pot, where all sorts of people could be found. Although their members were numerous, it was also highly chaotic inside. Chapter 244. 2. Stop the killing by killing. Although the Hunters Guild was able to hold a position of power in Cloud Heaven, if one were to be very strict about it, they could not compare to the other 4 major powers. So what everyone saw on the surface was just one side. The reality hidden beneath was they were not truly acknowledged by the others. Not to mention Imo Jingyu, who was such a haughty and proud man. He couldn't even be bothered with a faction of power that was not even worth his notice. Back in those earlier years, even when the Hunters Guild had not been all that much to look at, such a thing would never have happened, where the guild members could blatantly come out to commit robbery like this. So how much lower had they fallen to now? Imo Jingyu could not help but curled his lips up into a contemptuous smile. Knowing that we are people from the Hunters Guild, and you still dare to offend us so outrageously, it seems to me that you are not aware of our guild's rules. The man carrying the large saber with a long chain wrapped around his arm then flashed a bloodthirsty smile on his face. The Hunters Guild's rules? It was probably known to everyone who was not a recluse and isolated themselves from the world. The Hunters Guild was famous for having the greatest number of members among the various powers in Cloud Heaven, and they were also in existence well known to avenge the slightest snub, biting back like a venomous snake. Anyone who came to provoke a person from the Hunters Guild would suffer maniacal and incessant revenge. But that was not because the Hunters Guild was being loyal or protective of their people, but it was to satisfy their own arrogance and to stroke their inflated egos, not allowing outsiders to show the guild any slight. Have the man dealt with on the spot, but leave the woman alive. Our brothers here have not broken fast for quite a long while already, the man said as he slowly undid the chain around his arm and pulled his hand back to stretch his wrist. The sound of his bones crackling rang out clearly as he gazed menacingly at the 2 people a short distance away. It looks like he is the leader among the bunch of robbers. But what did he just say? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Imo Jingyu's face that had been smiling all this while suddenly turned to show a completely indiscernible expression on his face, as the aura around his body silently changed without anyone knowing. He was used to be recklessly willful and already did not have a good reputation, so he did not care how people looked at him. But when someone was speaking ill of people he cared about, or about the person that held a position in his heart, he was definitely not going to allow that to pass. Feier, stand to the side a moment. Let me put an end to all these scum. Mo Jingyu's voice was still as gentle as before, but the aura that was flaring out from his body that sent chills running through a person was impossible to miss. Qing Lan Fei sighed out of breath. Qing Yu, do not try to dissuade me. I know that you have a kind heart, but the entire bunch of them will just be a plague letting them live, and they will have to die sooner or later. Mo Jingyu said bitingly, you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.